I'm delighted to introduce to you Christian Wood. He's an old student, an apprentice, and a spiritual brother of mine. Welcome, Christian, to our event. It's so good that you joined us today. I appreciate you taking the time despite your busy schedule.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, Lama.
It's been a while since you started exploring Qigong with me about 10 years ago. Could you give us a brief synopsis about your journey, how you got into the energy arts in general, and perhaps also what brought you to Qigong in particular?
I'll try to make this brief, but, my interest and exploration of energy arts goes back to when I was a teenager, really. I always had an interest in spirituality. I had, as a child, noticed a lot of things that other people didn't seem to notice, and there wasn't a lot of people to talk to about what I was noticing. But I did discover yoga and Eastern philosophy pretty early in my teens. And, I actually learned yoga out of a book. And I don't remember what book it was, but I learned some yoga poses. I learned various meditation techniques, concentration techniques where you stare at a candle. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that I learned. And in yoga, one of my favorite poses was headstand. I, for some reason, really loved headstand, and I got to the place where, like, I could do headstand with my legs.
Gives you a different slant on life.
It sure does. I could do it with my legs straight up or legs folded, and I could actually do it for several minutes with my eyes closed. So I was exploring a lot as a teenager, and I also discovered Tai Chi in my late teens. This was when I was living in Norway. Oslo, Norway, and I was reading the Course in Miracles, some pretty out there spiritual texts. So it's always been a part of my life. And in my 20s, I studied with a sword master, and I actually there were different styles that I studied, but I studied fencing, and I actually taught fencing for quite a few years in my late 20s. And Chinese medicine was a big part of my journey. Like, I discovered that early on as well in my late teens. And so I've always resonated with that. And so I kept gravitating back towards the Oriental arts, whether it be the energy arts or herbalism, acupuncture. And there's also another connection between you and I, actually how we met, was through an organization called Susila Bodhidharma, which I was initiated into when I was 18. And when I moved to Portland in 2009, at some point I met you at the Subud House, and you then also shared about Qigong and the similarities between the practices in Susila Bodhidharma and what is done in Qigong. So that's kind of the short version, and that brings us to 10 years ago when you and I met. And I think within a year or so, I jumped into your beginner, intermediate, and advanced programs. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a long journey.
Marvelous. And in addition to that, you also explored and started practicing coaching, right?
Yes, when I moved to Portland after 2008, I'd been living in Los Angeles for about 5 years. What had actually brought me there was interning and studying with a film composer in Hollywood, and I ended up doing a lot of music recording, live music in LA. But when 2008 came, you remember that was like a big crash in the market, and there's a big kind of upset in the economy, and all of a sudden, okay, I wasn't getting the same amount of work in LA, and so I decided to move up to Portland. And when I moved here, I also decided to kind of jump into a new field, and I've always had an affinity for coaching, even though years and years ago I didn't necessarily have that word for it because I was always the kind of person that friends would come to and ask for advice, and I had a knack for listening and supporting other people, and I really love doing that. It's very natural for me.
Mhm.
So I decided to enter a coaching program here in Portland, and I got certified. That was 2009, around the same time that I was doing the program with you.
Right.
Yeah, so that's something I've been doing part-time for the last now more than 10 years. Well, that's almost 12 years.
12 years, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, the type of coaching that you learned from Ferocia Knight, whom you studied with,
Yep.
and the type of Qigong coaching that we practice are not exactly the same, but there are some parallels. And you didn't really dive into Qigong coaching proper that much, but you have at least some experience receiving it. And I wonder if you can kind of run side by side your perspective on what one feels, what the other feels, pros and cons, so to speak.
I was grateful for the training I got with Ferocia at her Baraka Institute. I think it's been renamed since, but she called that methodology whole person design, which actually, that concept at least, would have resonance with, Qigong, Qigong coaching.
For sure.
Now, one of the things, I was grateful for all that I learned, but the methodology that she taught was a little too structured for my taste. It's like a little too procedural, and that actually could probably be very helpful for people new to the field, where they need to have more clear, like, these are the kind of questions you ask, these are the kind of sequences of things you do. And so it has validity. However, I personally never really resonated with that, because to me, when I'm supporting someone, I'm really deeply listening, and I'm paying attention to what they're saying, how they're saying it, their body language. And I don't come in with preconceived questions that I have for them or ways of asking things. The listening is what brings me to what questions I might ask.
Exactly.
And that probably is really in line with what you do in Qigong coaching. And certainly what I learned from you in doing the beginner, intermediate, and advanced courses has informed how I work with people in just a very natural way.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the core competencies in coaching, the ability to listen and respond according to the specific issues that kind of become apparent in the present moment. One of the things that we do in Qigong and in Qigong coaching is also we focus a great deal on embodiment. So not just a whole person design, but actually a whole human being has to be addressed. Basically, we have to address the mind and the body and our emotions and energy and relationships and money. Everything has to be integrated rather than compartmentalized. Sometimes people say, well, is it just like life coaching? And I say, not quite. We're not just looking at the life as like, what do you want to be when you grow up? But much more specific, much more pinpointed in terms of what are the exact issues or what are the exact accomplishments that you are trying to manifest, but also what are the energy resources that you need to tap into in order to be able to manifest what you aspire to manifest. Now, in terms of energy awareness, how would you say it affects your daily life and perhaps professional life as well?
It's a big part of it. As I alluded to in describing my path of discovering the energy arts, this has really been part of my life, all of my adult life and into my teens. So energy awareness is super important. First of all, it's very important to have an awareness of your own energies, so you have a good understanding of your own experience. A lot of times, what people call being unconscious versus being conscious really comes down to that kind of awareness. Are you aware of the experience you're actually having? And a lot of times when I work with clients, a big part of what I'm helping them with is helping them become more aware of what's going on within them. When people are overwhelmed and they're confused, they are not tapping into that full awareness within themselves. So for me, cultivating that awareness personally does affect me in my professional life and how I can show up for others. Not just listening to them, but noticing how I'm showing up with them, because it is a relationship.
Right, and it's also an example of self-awareness that then you can be a role model of for your clients, because it's hard to teach people how to become self-aware or develop self-knowledge if you are not walking your talk.
That is true. That is true. And I mean, a lot of what we do in any form of coaching, whether it's life coaching or Qigong coaching, that fluidity of being able to really notice ourselves, listen to what the other are saying, and then most importantly, be a role model, as you said, because when they notice your energy, whether they consciously notice it or not, it begins to affect them. And as you know, I know that you love the science behind this. So right. When you think of like how then vagus nerve affects things, the vagus nerve is designed as a relational kind of antenna. Like we actually pick up on the energy of other people. And so when a client is tuning into where you're at, it puts them in a greater state of receptivity and resilience to face the things that need to be faced during that session. And that's an important component in the whole process.
Absolutely. And we all have mirror neurons that basically help facilitate the monkey see, monkey do type of experiences. So yeah. When we are in a company of a more relaxed person, we feel more relaxed. When we're in the company of a person who is really wired up or stressed, we usually have a greater degree of tension in our bodies.
Yeah.
Or maybe it has something to do with energy resonance. So it's not just that person affects us or we affect them. It's both of us feel the degree of energy resonance between us.
Yeah.
And then respond accordingly. When we're in greater resonance, we become more relaxed, more comfortable with each other. When we have dissonance, it's likely that there's going to be some degree of stress, or central nervous system will be busy sending signals of contraction to the muscles in the body.
Yeah, and the other part of it too is when, as a practitioner, we have a greater capacity to include experiences that may be challenging. I mean, for example, if a client is under a lot of distress emotionally, mentally, and we don't mind that, so we're not in resistance of the fact that they're tense, maybe there's very challenging emotions coming up. If we're relaxed in the presence of those challenging experiences they're having, it gives them permission to have that experience. So there's no conflict between us in that scenario. And a lot of times, one of the greatest things people need is just simple acceptance.
Well, acceptance is a prerequisite for attention. It's really hard to pay attention to oneself and therefore have self-awareness if there is no self-acceptance.
Mm-hmm. And but it's also understandable, like people can have very challenging situations where they hit a wall where they're finding, here's a pocket of lack of acceptance, which can be one of the reasons that are looking for support. And so we can lend our acceptance to them in the scenario that could very often make it easier for them to find self-acceptance.
Absolutely, yes. Similar to what we were talking about before, we serve as a role model of acceptance.
Yep.
And then our coaching client, of course, can learn how to become more accepting from us. Basically, if the coach is more accepting, it's more likely that his clients also will become more accepting. And if the coach is constantly having difficulty with accepting what is, well, it stands to reason that the clients will be experiencing some challenge as well. It's almost like, again, mirror neurons, monkey see, monkey do.
Right. Yeah. And if they don't resonate with that, they're likely to fire us.
Well, yes. And that's one of the great aspects of coaching business is that we don't get paid by the insurance companies. People pay out of their pocket. In many cases, it will be a business expense for them if they're hiring us to improve their professional life. But either way, it's something that they have to actually pay out of the pocket. And so they are really thinking through how much return on investment will I get if I invest this money into my coaching program. And if they don't get the return on investment they were hoping for, well, that makes sense then that they will either not continue with the coaching program or they will simply quit and want money back. Coaches usually don't pay money back. They usually say, well, you make a commitment to 3 or 6 months or whatever length of time you commit to as a coaching client, but it just simply that's going to be the end of their coaching experience. And one of the things, as I can imagine, speaking of the business of coaching or in general, is that it also changes the relationship with money, doesn't it? We actually develop a different and rather more awakened attitude and way to relate to the energy of money. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, first tell me a little bit more how you feel that relationship changes. I'm just a little curious of your perspective on that.
What kind of changes you go through when you start relating to money differently? Well, like I just mentioned, for example, we start looking at all the payments that we make as investments. So we're not just spending money on coaching or on anything else. I don't spend money on clothes. I don't spend money on food. I don't spend money on dwelling. I invest money in all of these things. And that basically is a very different attitude when you feel like I'm actually improving quality of my life by investing money into this or that or product or service. And another thing that also happens is that we start relating to money as energy. And by energy, I mean exactly that. Most of the monetary transactions nowadays happen in the form of electrons running up and down the wires. And so all of these electronic transactions appear to have value in terms of dollars or cryptocurrency or some other means of store of value, but it's just energy. And the funny thing about it is that the value of money also becomes very different in our mind when we start realizing its value is what we decide to be. It's almost like there is some consensus reality and we decide. For example, like you and I like to talk about cryptocurrencies. And the value of various cryptocurrencies is basically what we just decide it's going to be. Not you and I decide, but it's a consensus decision, so to speak. And it's basically energy exchange where the energy flows more in one direction or another direction. And then you simply need to find yourself in the flow so that the cash flow is actually flowing into your pocket, so to speak, or at least you're not being sidelined by it. Does it make sense?
Yeah, thank you for giving your context on that. And I would agree with most of that. Yeah, money is energy. And I think one of the fundamental things about any form of currency, whether it's dollars or cryptocurrency or cacao beans, whichever way we want to exchange currency, is
Shells.
It really essentially is a vehicle to track reciprocity. It's about reciprocity. I give you this, you give me that. And that also comes down to agreement. I mean, what is this worth versus that? And So it's been around for a very long time in many, many different forms. So, there was once a time when we would simply trade a cow for, some other goods. But then I suppose at some point someone asked the question of, well, this thing that I have to trade for your cow is actually worth more. And then they'd have to figure out, well, here, have this bushel of cacao beans to make up for the difference. So, I mean, we've figured out many very clever ways of facilitating that reciprocity. And but I like what you said about, speaking of investment rather than spending, because spending, expenditure is all going out. And investing implies when I spend money on this is what I get out of it. And I invest in my health in a lot of different ways. I eat really good food. I exercise. I take supplements. I go to get acupuncture. I take herbs. And I've taken training with you, and then I have various practices I can do. So, when we look at it in terms of investment, there's a mindfulness around, is this an expenditure that really is going to yield what I'm actually looking for? And a lot of times people are confused about what they're actually going to get out of something. We have clothing. It has various functions, right? Some of it is to keep us warm when it's cool. So some of it is for the sake of a societally agreed modesty, quote unquote, like of not walking around naked. It could be stylishness, fashion statement. There's a lot of different things you can get out of it. But there's also a lot of unconscious choices people make. Teenagers learn really early, oh, look at the pop stars or movie stars, what they're wearing, and then they want to mimic that.
Yes, and YouTube influencers.
Yeah, apparently that's a job.
It is. And it's actually a pretty lucrative job for some of the influencers, as far as I understand.
So I hear. So, as long as there's a social agreement that something is valuable, there's all kinds of odd ways to make money.
Yeah, and speaking of odd ways to make money, thanks to the pandemic, the way people make money these days often is quite different from the way we did just a year or so ago. And it seems like things are going to be continuing to change farther away from the old normal. So if we look at the new normal, so to speak, we communicate with each other through the video chat. Even though you and I are in the same city, we actually ended up recording this interview through Skype. And we communicate with people from all over the world using Zoom or various video chat options. But not only us as coaches, we also know that students are taking classes through online education programs. Even doctors have telemedicine going on. And obviously, most people don't even go to the office anymore. They work remotely from home. So looking at these kind of changes, and perhaps we can look at some other shifts that have occurred in the last year or so. What do you see the new normal looks like and is going to look like perhaps in the near future?
Obviously the pandemic has had a huge effect on the whole world in a whole variety of ways. I mean, yes, obviously, lots of people have lost work. Whole industries have disappeared. Some of them may recover, some of them may not. One of the main things I was doing previously was audio video work, which was tied to live events, and that all the contracts that I had last year got canceled in March.
Right.
And so, I had to respond to, okay, what do I do now? And, certainly millions and millions of people are in the same boat you think restaurant industry, like any of these in-person.
The hospitality, travel industry, cruise lines, all kinds of things.
So what the new normal is going to be, well, I guess we'll have to see. I mean, you started doing remote coaching, what, 15 years or so ago, maybe 16?
Right, more. Mhm.
And there's lots of upsides for that. And a lot of people are working at home, those that can. And there's some positive aspects to this. And some of these changes are, whether we like them or not, are probably here to stay.
Well,
But there's also some enormous downsides to all of this on health and well-being, which hasn't really gotten talked about extensively or not enough, I feel. The effect on children staying home, being homeschooled, and not socializing with other children as much as before. Um, I dare say when we really look back at this, you'd probably see that there's an epidemic of loneliness, um, increase in depression, increase in domestic violence, child abuse, because people are stuck at home.
each other's face.
Well, but in many cases, this is not a laughing matter because,
Right.
and we really haven't seen the stats on this yet, but people who are prone to depression or anxiety or households that have any aspects of domestic violence are, then you put on top of that losing work, not being able to go out. I mean, there's some really very dire ramifications to this that are not easily reconciled. Skype does not solve this. Zoom does not solve this. People are designed for human contact and touch and in-person connection. So if the new normal is that we're not going to be able to have as much direct face-to-face human contact, there's probably some enormous downsides to this in the long term.
Yeah, I would say there's going to be downsides in terms of having less socially adaptable children who basically grow up with a little bit lower social IQ, so to speak. And there also probably going to be a much greater sense of discomfort in terms of participating in large gatherings. Like, you invite people to a gathering of any sort, and probably you will get a lot of questionable glances like, wait a moment, I don't want to go into a gathering of more than 5, 6 people. And on the other hand, there's been plenty of backlash against that. People want to go to gatherings, just like last year we had political movements happening in America that basically were gathering lots of people on streets and in various venues. Not necessarily the healthiest events. Some of them turned out to be big super spreaders, but at least gives us an idea that people are kind of revolting against the social isolation. They feel like they really need some kind of contact with other human beings.
Well, and legitimately so. We're designed for that kind of contact. So I think this whole pandemic has brought out a lot of very polarized dialogue around this. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be hard for people to deal with the fact that multiple things are true at the same time.
Right.
Dealing with, how to deal with the pandemic is one, but it does not negate how do we deal with depression and anxiety and loneliness and all of these other issues that get exasperated by lack of social contact and due to social isolation. So, I think one of the things moving forward we're going to have to really figure out is how do we deal with all of the important issues? Because the pandemic isn't the only important issue. It's only one of very many different, very important issues. Right. And there's been a focal point on it as if it's the only thing that we should be focusing on, which is not really true.
No, it's just a disruptor event that kind of pushed to the limit some of the existing traits, and on the other hand, disrupted some old patterns that could not continue any longer. Okay. So, for example, the way that money is being perceived has changed. The government, at least in many first world countries, throwing money at the populace, just literally sending checks or giving big loans, many of which you don't even have to repay. that's like, okay, there's a windfall of money all of a sudden falling on my lap. I didn't even have to work for it. Now what? That changes the relationship with the energy of money. On the other hand, this crazy boom of cryptocurrencies that basically make some people millionaires as a result of just investing 1,000 or two into Bitcoin, or I don't know, Dogecoin.
Um, well, it's gonna be interesting to see how all of this plays out. I think it's way too soon to make any predictions on what the new normal is going to be, and I think any new normal that the general collective rest on is probably not actually really normal. It's just common. I mean, I think we could probably agree that the collective comes up with some pretty absurd norms um, long before this pandemic came around.
Well, I think if you are a adopted individual, well adjusted to the Sikh society, is not a sign of good health.
That's an excellent quote. That's actually Jiddu Krishnamurti who said that.
Okay,
It is no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Yeah, he said that back 50, 60 years ago. That's a stellar quote, and it's very true.
Right. So, to wrap up our interview today, well, what are your personal ways to adapt to the current flow of life so that next year is going to be better for you than previous year?
Well, I mean, first, just to answer that, even though all my contracts were lost last year in the one main career I was working on the last few years, I'm better off this year by far than I was before. So thankfully, I was able to respond to kind of the void that opened up of, oh, suddenly, things are different. I have to do something different. I have to be different. Like circumstances are now different. I have to be different, and I have to respond. And it definitely took a little while to kind of figure out, like, holy shit, what do I do now? Now, luckily, because I've already, been trained as a life coach and have been doing that part-time for over 10 years, I had that as something I wanted to return to. And initially, I've been focusing on developing group programs, which beginning to roll out this next month, with another one coming in the fall. So I took the last year to reinvent myself and respond to these different circumstances, and I faced the facts that this other career is probably not coming back. And so rather than waiting for it to come back, I just squarely looked that in the face and realized, nope, this is I'm not going to wait around for it. I'm going to be proactive, and so I started moving in that new direction. Mm-hmm. And to answer your question further, how do I, how do I relate to society, which really is profoundly sick in many ways, right? So you don't want to be well adapted to it, but there is resilience in the face of it, and how can you stay in your own energy bubble? And that does not mean isolating yourself, but it's resting in your own sovereign energetic field. And that's definitely something that I've learned from working with you, that it's important, but also like how to do that. Now, when you rest in this sovereign space of your own energetic bubble, you're actually more functional in your ability to connect with others. So it's not about what's that?
Because you're more relaxed. You're not trying to pretend somebody who you are not, which takes effort and often requires tension.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great point, because a lot of times people are going around like they don't know who they are, they don't know who they're supposed to be. And now when people's identities are really closely tied to their career, and their career has maybe disappeared, you're going to literally have an identity crisis. Right. But then when you have an identity crisis, there's an opportunity to reinvent yourself. Now, this kind of ties back to really another great thing that I've learned from you within Qigong. It's related to dream yoga. Now, when you realize that life is actually a dream and that you're actually a dream character, and that ultimately, you know, if you go into the deep esoterics of it, there's only one conscious being appearing in many, many forms. And but when you have that perspective, there's flexibility. Like, who I am is not this solid object. It's something that is constantly in flux. So I would invite other people to really explore that, because it does put you in a greater position to respond to life when you have that flexibility. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And since you mentioned that you are launching a group coaching program, would you share with our viewers a little bit about it and how they would be able to take advantage of your offer?
Yes, I mean, like you, this last year, I've done a lot of contemplations on the nature of abundance, both seeing a career go away and then watching, you know, all of these things play out in the world. I took a deep dive into, you know, relearning some of what I'd studied before, which is from the alchemical traditions. And you know, when you look at money from the perspective of the alchemical process, it's a whole different approach. And so when you look at money as energy, when you look at abundance as an energetic thing, there's tremendous opportunity to relate to it in a very different way. So in the process of diving into that and connecting with a friend of mine, Christopher, we've created a program together, which is going to be launched in May. It's called Harnessing Your Hidden Powers to Prosper. So it's diving deep into those internal resources. We'll probably have a masterclass. We'll make sure that there's a link to the masterclass and the full course under this video. And so there'll be a clear way people can connect with us to participate in that. And one of the things that influenced that journey for me of going deeper into the nature of abundance in an energetic way was actually a book released by Gay Henricks last year called Conscious Luck. Mm. And that is a great book. I know you've interviewed him many times and you know him. And my teaching partner, Christopher, has worked closely with him and knows him personally as well. So yes, the ability to orient to luck not as something that happens to you, but actually as an internal orientation. When you feel lucky, you orient to opportunities in a completely different way. You're not waiting for things to happen for you. You are welcoming everything that is happening as an opportunity. And, you know, like, as you know, I earlier this year had a skiing accident where I hurt my shoulder badly. Now, that would seem like bad luck, right? But no, it's actually, yes, it was painful. It's certainly not what I wanted. But because of the experience and how I oriented to being with that experience, it took me even deeper inside of myself, and I found a greater level of resilience and determination as a result of facing that the way that I did. And so I can look back and go, okay, although I did not want that to happen, how lucky I was that it did, because here's all the great things that came out as a result. So that's also a big part of the teachings within abundance and how you can orient to life in a different way.
Yeah, that's a very enlightened approach to experiencing setbacks. Mm-hmm. And actually discovering opportunities within those challenges, and eventually become grateful for having those learning opportunities. So when you look back at those events or instances in your life, there is no regret, there is no anger, there is no sadness about them. There's actually gratitude. And I don't need to remind you or our viewers about the power of gratitude. That's a pretty important skill. Yeah. And we learn how to develop this skill through coaching. Now, I really want to thank you once again for taking the time today and for sharing with us about yourself and your practices, and also for inviting our viewers to check out your program and your masterclass. And I definitely encourage all our viewers to not hesitate, dive into Christian's teachings. They're right on the money. I fully endorse them. And I want you to enjoy his masterclass. Just use the link below this video for that. Thank you once again, Christian. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Lama. I appreciate the opportunity to converse with you and share this with your viewers.